Go ahead, picture a Viking. I bet you're seeing a towering, blonde, blue-eyed warrior from the icy north. That image is everywhere, but it's not the whole story. For decades, we had artifacts and sagas, fragments of a bigger puzzle. Now, ancient DNA and isotope science let us read the people themselves. The result is a more interesting truth. The Viking Age was not a single bloodline exploding out of Scandinavia, but a connected world of movement exchange and shifting identities where Viking described what you did more than who your grandparents were. The scientific breakthrough came when researchers sequenced hundreds of Viking Age genomes from burials across Scandinavia, the British Isles, the Baltic, and Greenland, extracting aDNA from dense tooth roots and the petrous bone verifying age-typical damage and modeling ancestry with autosomal data rather than relying on single maternal or paternal lineages. Those genomes showed gene flow into Scandinavia from the south and east, and a web of contacts long before longships made landfall abroad, overturning the idea of an isolated north. In plain terms, diversity was built in. One headline finding is that being buried like a Viking didn't require Scandinavian ancestry. At elite and ordinary graves alike, archaeologists find people with local, non-Scandinavian genetic profiles who had adopted Viking material culture and were treated as insiders in death. In Orkney, for example, individuals interred with classic Norse gear carried largely local insular ancestry, showing that communities in the North Atlantic could become Viking in practice and status without a Scandinavian genome. Inside Scandinavia, big trading hubs like Ribe in Denmark and markets around the Baltic pulled in people from many backgrounds. Strontium and oxygen isotopes, chemical fingerprints locked in tooth enamel when you grow up, reveal non-locals settling, marrying, working, and sometimes dying far from their birthplaces. Pair those isotopes with the genomes and the picture sharpens. Mobility wasn't the exception, it was the operating system of the age. Another revelation: the blonde-only stereotype doesn't hold. Genetic variants linked to brown hair were common among Viking Age individuals, and the study that compared them with modern Danes suggests the past included more dark-haired people than the modern cliché allows. Looks varied because ancestry varied, and because Scandinavia itself wasn't a closed box. It was a crossroads that absorbed people over time from nearby Europe and farther afield. Movement also ran in both directions. We tend to imagine a one-way arrow, Scandinavians sailing out. But the data show people and genes flowing into Scandinavia too. Sites like Ribe and Gotland read like cosmopolitan ports. Isotope results flag migrants. Artifacts trace trade networks, graves mix styles and goods in ways that map to the traffic of people, not just the travel of objects. And abroad, we see the mirror image, burials in Britain, Ireland, and along the Baltic with clear Scandinavian ancestry, testimony to settlement as well as raiding. At the same time, the Viking world wasn't one big family all mixing together. When scientists cluster genomes by fine-scale ancestry, distinct regional lanes pop out that match roots known from history and archaeology. Norwegians trending west to the North Atlantic Danes, focusing on England, and Swedes pushing east into the Baltic and river routes toward today's Russia and Ukraine. Those lanes stayed surprisingly distinct, hinting at separate networks, rivalries, or just practical geography that kept communities tied to their own spheres. Case studies make the shift from myth to method feel real. Take the grand ship burials. The Oseberg Mound in Norway held two high-status women laid to rest with an astonishing array of goods: carved sleighs, a wooden cart, animal heads, textiles, and sacrificed animals. An elite send-off that says power wasn't only a male story. A short sail away, the Gokstad ship entombed a high-status man with weapons and rich equipment. Recent analytical work on its fittings even traces metal sources and workshop practices, showing how materials and makers moved through shared networks. These graves anchor the social top end. aDNA and isotopes tell us who those people might have been and where they came from. One grave changed the conversation around gender entirely. BJ 581 at Birka in Sweden, long hailed as the textbook male warrior burial, complete with sword, axe, spear, armor-piercing arrows, 2 shields, a gaming set, and 2 horses. Genomic sexing confirmed the individual was biologically female, 2 X chromosomes, while isotopes indicate mobility during life. Scholars debate what the equipment means for her lived role, but the data close the door on the old assumption that such graves must be male and open a better question. How did women participate in military and command structures in different Viking contexts? Methods matter, so here's the quick toolkit. Ancient DNA is extracted in clean rooms from bones or teeth, authenticated by characteristic molecular damage and low contamination, and analyzed mainly with autosomal genome-wide data to model mixtures of ancestries. Y-DNA and mtDNA haplogroups track single paternal or maternal lines. They're useful for history but can't, on their own, define a people. Isotopes tell different stories. 87 SAR, 86 SAR ratios reflect the geology where a person grew up. D18O tracks water and climate. D13C and D15N reflect diet, showing, for example, shifts from marine-heavy to terrestrial food webs in some regions. When multiple lines of evidence converge, say non-local strontium plus a genome that clusters outside the local baseline, the interpretation that a person migrated becomes much stronger. All of this refines, not replaces, artifacts and texts. Runestones still speak, memorials at places like Jelling mark kingly families and shifting identities. Inscriptions across Scandinavia and the diaspora show names, titles, and place links that map to the same mobility we see in chemistry and DNA. Trade goods still matter. Glass beads, scales, and weights, silver dirhams from the Islamic world, and combs and textiles help track routes that genes also traveled. And ship technology remains the engine under it all. Clinker-built hulls turn coasts into highways where ancestry can move as quickly as amber or furs. Crucially, the new genetics doesn't flatten the Viking world into biology. Culture isn't coded in a single variant, and identity wasn't set by hair color or haplogroup. The Viking Age looks more like layered networks: language, law, shipcraft, belief, ambition, into which people with different ancestries stepped, sometimes rising to the top. That matches the clear regional variation we see today. Fine-scale ancestry in Norway differs from Denmark, differs from Sweden. Island communities showed different blends than inland valleys, and later medieval movements further reshaped the map. The numbers will keep moving as more burials are sampled and as reference datasets improve. But the direction is stable: enduring diversity at home, selective lanes abroad, and identities built as much by action and affiliation as by origin. Ethics and limits also belong in the story. aDNA work is destructive. It drills bone and tooth to powder, which is why permissions, consultation, and minimal sampling strategies matter. Results depend on context, secure dating, careful excavation, and transparent lab protocols. And interpretation has to resist simple headlines. A female genome in a grave with weapons is confirmed, but what counts as a warrior is a cultural question that needs the whole dossier: osteology context, wear on gear, and comparisons across cemeteries. So what did genetics really change? It punctured the myth of a single blonde, homogeneous Norse stock and replaced it with a higher resolution picture. Scandinavia already diverse. Viking networks pulling people in and sending people out, regional lanes with distinct signatures, and identities you could join. It also gave archaeologists a way to test ideas about mobility that artifacts alone could only imply, showing concrete cases of arrivals from the British Isles into Scandinavia and vice versa migrants in market towns and family ties stretching along the routes the ships took. Put simply, the Viking face is not one face. It could be a brown-haired trader from Denmark who grew up far from the North Sea coast. A Pictish-descended islander buried under a Norse-style stone in Orkney, a woman in Birka interred with a commander's kit, or a craftsman whose metalwork links Oslo fjord workshops to far-off markets. And the more we read from bones and soil alongside runes and ships, the more those faces come into focus. The Viking Age wasn't an invasion by a single people. It was a century-spanning system of movement, opportunity, and power that bound the North to the wider world. The truth in the bones is clear. Connection, migration, and identity made the Norse world, as much as sails and steel did, and the story is still sharpening with every new genome and isotope baseline. Enjoyed this evidence first dive? Like the video and subscribe to Unfolding Legacy for more history decoded. Viking.